Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE PN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is J. Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today, my guest is Chris Miles. Chris is the cash flow expert and anti-financial advisor, and is a leading authority teaching entrepreneurs and professionals how to get their money working for them today. He's an author, podcast host of the Chris Miles Money Show. He's been featured in U.S. News, CNN Money, EO Fire, and has a proven reputation with his company, Money Ripples, for getting his clients fast, life-altering financial results. In fact, his personal clients have increased their cash flow by over $200 million in the last 10 years. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Chris about how to create an anti-financial plan. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE PN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. I dare you. Go ahead. And also leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. And also, if you'd like to see how attractive our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. And you can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Chris. Welcome to CRE PN Radio.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I've always been told I have a radio voice, so maybe they don't want to go to the YouTube channel. Maybe this is just safer for us not to have them go there.
I don't know. Well, we'll have to see if they, if they want to check it out. They'll have to just go and check it out. So. But Chris, I appreciate you doing this. Before we get into our talk today, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, almost 20 years ago, I started out as a traditional mainstream financial advisor, right? Like the type that you've always seen that, wears the suit and the tie that's way too short with the belly sticking out and all that kind of stuff, right? I was basically the salesman in a suit. Did that financial advising for 4 years. It wasn't my intention to go into financial advising, funny enough. I actually was planning to go into business consulting, but I figured if I was going to go into business consulting, I should have real life business experience. So I actually dropped out of college, went into financial advising because that was the first business that I realized I could do. I didn't realize they took anybody off the street. As long as you could pass a license and a test, right, they would take people. But I started doing it and loved being the entrepreneur and actually dropped out of college, never went back. But when I did that for 4 years, I started to see patterns, right? I'm always the kind of guy that likes to see patterns around me, sometimes that people don't always see. And the pattern I was starting to notice was even people that had financial advice for, decades, right? Even for 20, 30 years, they still really weren't financially free. But, part of me wanted to deny that because, of course, if you've been trained in that industry, they always show you the numbers. They show you the stock market's averaged, 10 or 12% since 2000 BC, right? And right. They try to convince you that mutual funds is the way to go, and so I was basically, insurance licensed and I was securities licensed. But I started to see that the real numbers, when I started to run real actual numbers, not the averages, which is a half truth, right? But real actual yields of returns, I started to realize that, like, for example, up until last week, the 30-year average of the stock market was almost exactly 8%, like the real return. But the last 20 years was 3.88%, right? When you start to put those numbers in, and then you start to realize, oh, well, inflation is actually higher than the government tells us because they're trying to save money for themselves. And you start to realize that there's still taxes and they're likely to go up. It starts to become like kind of a dismal conversation. And after about 4 years, I was trying to hang on with my heart at war, right? Like the heart was saying, hey, maybe this isn't the best thing, while the brain was saying, actually, this is how you make money. What are you going to do, right? Like, do you just find a middle ground or whatever? And so I was mortgage licensed, life and health insurance license, as well as securities license. I eventually dropped the securities license. And then there was a friend that I had trained in the business that left. He and his father would decide to partner up to do real estate investing, right? And it was at the end of 2005, we started having a conversation. I thought, okay, he's probably gonna be broke. He's gonna want work with me again. Well, no, it was the exact opposite. He told me, he said, Chris, like the last 4 months have been awesome. He'd only quit for 4 months. Get this, right? 4 months have been awesome. My dad, who's a professor at a local university, has now doubled his income with passive income from his investing. And I said, come on. And this is the type of thing that you hear people say all the time, even to me sometimes, is that's too good to be true, right? And he's like, no, I'm dead serious. Like, it's amazing what we're doing right now. And we got in this debate about what's better, stocks or real estate. And he finally stopped me and said, Chris, listen, how many of your clients are actually financially free where they don't worry about money? Now, I'm not saying the ones that are retired, but the ones that are actually free. I said, well, none, because even the retired ones watch CNN, and you can never be free when you watch CNN, right? This better not be a CNN syndicated show because we'd be in trouble.
You're safe. Yeah.
Good. And then he said, now the second question, Chris, all right, since your clients haven't been free, how about you guys? Because as financial advisors, you should have it figured out better than anyone on the planet. So of you guys, how many of you are financially free, not off the commissions that you're earning from selling this stuff, but actually from doing the investments you've been recommending? And I thought about it and I said, none. I'm like, maybe there's this one guy in my office that might be. And I found out later he wasn't either. And so none of them were, myself or anybody, even people who have been in the business for 30 or 40 years, they weren't financially free off their investments either. He said, Chris, there's your problem. I said, well, give me the answer. He's like, I'm not going to give you the answer because I don't think you're going to be open to it anyways. And that just made me want it more, right? He just took it away from me. So I ended up saying, all right, fine. What is it? And he's like, all right, if you're really serious, go get this Robert Kiyosaki book, not Rich Dad Poor Dad, because you've read that a couple of times, Chris, but read Who Took My Money, which basically just rips into mutual funds. So he's like, go get Who Took My Money. And then go listen to this radio show, this local AM radio show that was going on here in Utah. It's like, listen to these guys. These guys are real estate investors. You should listen to what they have to say. And so I did. And this was like January. I started to do this. I went through the Kiyosaki's book pretty quickly in one day. And then I started listening to this radio show. And after about 2 months or so, they had a little, live event at a hotel nearby. And they basically started ripping on financial advice, like high risk creates high returns. They say, well, when is a 90% chance of losing create a 90% chance of winning, right? Especially if you're in the insurance world, you already know this. You can't really, mess up the numbers, right? You can't take higher risk to get higher returns. That doesn't happen. Because if that's the case, we should all go buy lottery tickets right now because we have the biggest chance of loss, right?
Right.
So that doesn't work for creating wealth. And they start talking about things like, you're in it for the long haul. Well, how long's the long haul? Or, how about, insurance is a necessary evil. They're like, that's just insurance companies trying to get you to quit your insurance after you've already paid them for years, right before you need to use it, right? And all that kind of stuff. And they're just going on about the stock market and what the real returns are and average versus actual and all this stuff, and blown up my entire island. And I was like, yeah, who would teach this junk? And then I realized it's me. I'm that guy. And they even asked, they said, even at one point they took a break. They said, hey, sorry, like if we're offending any financial advisors, are there any financial advisors in the room? I was going to raise my hand, but when I realized I would be the only hand in that room of 100 people, I quickly brought it down. I was like, do not point me out. And my friend, of course, laughed because he knew that was me. That weekend, I quit. I said, I'll never go back to financial advising again. I will just be a mortgage broker and I'll teach ballroom dancing because a little known fact, I was one of the nation's top amateur ballroom dancers. So I was going to just do that. And but the thing is, I wanted to know what they knew. I want to know how they're creating wealth and retiring in their 20s and 30s. I was 28 at the time. Well, I started to learn from them. And lo and behold, within a matter of months, by that summer, I found out I was actually out of the rat race. I was able to essentially stop actively working. And so it kind of blew my mind. And I thought, well, this was way easier than I thought. I thought I'd have to save up $2 million and live on, $60,000 a year if I was lucky, right? If it wouldn't outlast me, or I wouldn't outlast my money, right? But I was like, wait, it's all about cash flow. Like things started to click. And that's when in 2007, I kind of came out of retirement, started teaching, really about, doing the opposite. Essentially, how do you get out of the rat race and that kind of thing?
Wow. So that's quite a turn of events on your financial career there, from being the disseminator and the average rate of return 8% kind of thing, as opposed to the real rate of return, and then recognizing that it's not working for people.
Hmm.
And and I think the other thing that your friend was asking you is how many financial advisors do you know that are actually able to retire or financially free? And that's
That was the second question. Yeah.
yeah, I find that to be uh, concerning and also revealing.
Yeah.
That so many of us are taught to get a good job, get a good education, get a
Right.
job, participate in the 401k, and over time everything works out.
Right.
And that that's not even, I mean, because it may work for you, and you may get to a point where you get to the end of your working days, and then maybe you don't have your health, and maybe you have all the money, whereas opposed to making the money work for you early, so you don't have to be tied to this um, illusion or fantasy or just the story we've been taught.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting you bring up the 401k, right? Because that's the one that people think is like the answer. I get a lot of people that say it's even worse if they're business owners and they're setting up their own 401ks and they pay their own match, right? But for those people that are even employed, where they get the match from the company, I just did a podcast I just barely released about the 401k, how it's impossible to retire with it. Because if you think about it, I mean, I did an example of someone who makes 140,000 a year, they max contribute the 19,500 a year, plus they get a 6% match from their company, which most companies don't even do that much. But I was playing devil's advocate against my own point, right? So there's like almost 28,000 a year going into their 401k, but when you factor in even a low rate of inflation, the actual yield after 35 years of max funding every single year of your 401k was the equivalent after taxes about $14,000 a year after inflation. So you save up, of your own money, almost 20,000 a year to live on 14,000 a year, right? And if you want to retire in 35 years on a 100,000 a year lifestyle, you got to be putting away $150,000 a year into these because the returns aren't great, the taxes aren't wonderful either, and they really just don't keep up. It's really just impossible to comfortably retire and be free just relying on a 401k.
yeah, a few years ago, I guess I came to the realization that the 401k is basically a forced savings plan.
Yeah.
Um, because while you are many times invested in the market in some way, shape, or form,
Mm-hmm.
usually mutual funds, um, what you've cited based on the real rate of return as opposed to the average.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I love it when you do the math. If you put in 10,000, or if you have 100,000 and the market's up 10% this year, so then you go up to 110,000, but then it goes down 10%. You're not down, or if you go down 2 years or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, and you come back 10%, you're not back where you started. You've essentially
That's
lost ground.
$99,000.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and and how that average rate of return, if you, I forget what that is, if you're up 16, or if you're up 16 one year, down 8 the next year,
Mhm.
the average, or I don't know, I'm not thinking clearly on the numbers, but if you get an average, you will get that average 8%, but the reality is that real rate is substantially lower when you actually look at the real numbers there. So
Yeah. Once you put in a negative number, the average and the actual numbers are different, right?
right.
Like you're saying, for example, and I remember first learning this in, I think it was 2004, 2000, it was 2005. I remember now, it was 2005. So this was a year before I quit, right? A guy came to our office and said, all right, everybody, say you have, $100,000. If you lose 50%, how much do you have? And we all said $50,000, right? He says, all right, so what rate of return do you need to get back to 100%? And all of us said 50%, right? Because you lose 50%, get 50%, you're back to even. He said, that's wrong. He's like, because if you make 50% on 50,000, that's only $25,000. You're only at $75,000. He's like, you
Right.
have to double your money after losing half. You have to double it. That's 100% rate of return. So he's like, look at this guy. He's like, take, 100%. minus 50, that equals 50 divided by 2 years. That's a 25% average return per year, even though you just got back to breaking even. He's like, oh, and of course there's, costs that come out. So maybe you're left with 98,000 after this cost. They never factor that in the return. So you actually have less after having you could actually lose money with a 25% average rate of return. And that's the big difference, is that when a company, they don't want to lie. They never want to misstate anything. But if you have the choice, if you're a company selling investments, which number are you going to show? The average is always going to be higher, or the actual yield that's going to be lower every time? Because if there's a negative year, they're going to be different. And of course, it's always going to be the case, right? You lose 10%, you need to gain 11.1% to get back to breaking even. You lose 20, you need 25. You lose 33, you need 50%. You lose 90%, like in the Great Depression, you need 900% to break even. Which, by the way, that's why every stock chart that you see that shows the averages over time always includes just before the Great Depression.
Right.
What better way to show the average than trying to include something where the market dropped 90%, had to get 900 to break even, and that just made the averages go astronomical, Right. That's what happened in the last year with COVID too, right? The market drops about 35%. It needs about 50% return to get back to breaking even. So you have financial advisors out there saying, hey, you've made 50% return on your money, 40% return on your money in the last 6 months. Why would you get out of the market? Well, why would I want to be in something that's so bipolar that I have no control in? That's the real question.
Right. No, it's almost scary when you come to the realization, especially if you've got any time spent doing this, thinking that you've got it all figured out. And then you come to the realization of that, how much time you've spent doing this, and how little time you've left to try and correct the situation. So let me ask you the topic, anti-financial plan.
Yeah.
I think everything we've been talking about thus far would be, similar to what a
mainstream financial plan.
would think of as a financial plan. You get the education, the job, and you go get the 401k.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your view, or what's your definition of the anti-financial plan?
Yeah, I like this quote, Jerry Seinfeld from an episode of Seinfeld, right, where he talks to George Costanza in an episode called Opposite George, where George actually becomes a winner for the one and only episode.
Right.
And he said, well, if every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right. And that's basically what the anti-financial plan is. It's like saying, what if we went away from what financial advisors offer? Because if you really dumb it down, they really only just offer mutual funds and then certain types of like annuities or insurance type based products. But that's it. Like it's really just Mexican food. It's a tortilla with beans, rice, meat, veggies and things like that, right? But whether it's a burrito, a taco, or tostada, they all have the same ingredients. It's just taking the same stuff and repurposing it, right? Anti-financial plan says, hey, we're going to go do the opposite. Instead of focusing on accumulation of money, which is the slow, really the guaranteed way to not create wealth that the poor middle class have been taught, let's do the certain way that's worked for the wealthy class, right? Which is going for alternative investments. Things like real estate, whether it be residential, commercial, whether it's things like, it could be oil and gas potentially, right? It could be doing things where you become the bank and you're lending money and getting better returns than they get, on different deals where you might get it backed by security, things that actually have real assets behind it, especially, right? You invest in mortgage notes. There's a variety of things you can invest in, right? A lot of it, usually the more certain stuff is going to be real estate based, which is why we're here today, right? That's the big thing. And so, like, for example, I had a client where he was actually on a good track for most people. He was in his early 30s, max funding his 401k, aggressively paying off his mortgage, doing everything that a good boy should do, right? And but the thing is, I said, well, let's project out. Let's extrapolate the numbers. What does it look like? And even by the time you're 40, well, he would actually have his house paid off, right? That would free up about $2,500 a month. He would probably have built up pretty darn close between savings and his retirement plan, almost $1 million, because the guy was just packing money away. Well, I said, as a strategy with him, I was working with him as a client. I said, here's what I would look at instead is, why don't we instead do this? One, we do a cash out refinance of your mortgage. Don't make it 15-year, make it a 30-year, which creates some defense too in case there's a bad times that come upon you, like, pre-COVID. This was when I was advising him on this. Now with COVID, he's probably grateful for it. But I was like, let's do a 30-year mortgage, create a smaller payment just in case something goes wrong. So we have a good defense, but we have a good offense too. By taking some of this cash, we can go and invest it. And then the other savings you have as well, we can invest it and buy actual real estate. So he went and he bought real estate properties, turnkey real estate, so he doesn't have to manage it or anything like that. Well, lo and behold, he went from trying to free up about $2,500 a month on his mortgage in about 8 years to already from the first 6 months creating an extra $4,000 a month of passive income. Now here's the key: taking that $4,000 a month, that $50,000 a year, right? Taking that, reinvesting it, and buying more assets, and again, kind of create what I call an income avalanche, where it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time he's 40, he's going to have well over a $10,000 a month passive income stream versus just trying to save $2,500 a month paying off his mortgage and then having this money locked up in his 401k that he can't touch for another 2 decades, right? And that's the goal, is that how do we get you to actually create income streams? How can we actually create passive income where you work because you want to, not because you have to? And that's the kind of thing that's where I have countless experiences like that over and over of people where we're actually building that passive income now. I've got some clients that were able to retire within the first year because maybe they don't have a huge overhead. Maybe they only need an extra $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month to live. And, a lot of them will do that within a few years. Others, most of my clients usually want at least $10,000, $20,000 a month, which, by the way, like I said, you want $10,000 a month. If you're fighting against inflation, that number keeps growing. It's hard to hit when you're trying to save. It's like a Dalmatian chasing a fire truck. It's hard to catch up to it, right? Like that's what happens when you're doing the mutual funds. Well, you can do it in real estate or things like that, where you can create quick cash flow and create acceleration of your money. It's amazing what you can create and accomplish.
No, I have come to witness that myself. I mean, just the I think you mentioned it, the mindset shift of asset, creating or accumulating assets versus the cash flow.
Yeah.
And I think the beautiful thing about real estate is it allows you both.
Yeah.
You can get the cash flow, which you seek, but also it's tied to a real asset that is appreciating, presumably appreciating, depending on what you're doing, or if you're in some sort of a commercial property, perhaps you're even able to force the appreciation, and whether you hang on to it and collect the cash flow, or you roll into something different, multiple streams, but just a little bit more control. For your clients that you work with, do you have any kind of a benchmark, or can you cite kind of the average, what they were experiencing as far as their rate of return, if they were doing it the traditional way as opposed to what they've been able to achieve going to alternative assets?
Oh yeah, all the time. Give you one example. I had a client who he had max funded his 401k since the mid 80s. So he was one of the first early adopters of being, typical middle America to use the 401k. Max funded it for, what would it have been? It would have been, this is 2010. He had max funded it every single year, only had $400,000 in it, thanks to the recession and everything else, right? Granted, if he would have kept doing that, he might have built it up to, pretty close to $1 million by today. But here's the thing, that $400,000, he was able to buy about $1 million of real estate that he was now starting to cash flow dramatically, right? Because remember, $400,000, even if you had $400,000 in your 401k, the thing is that a good financial advisor, right? One that's more up to date, that says, hey, I recognize that the 4% rule, they used to be that back in the day, 20 years ago, they'd say, hey, you can live on 4% of whatever your money is to let your money last. Well, that was true based on numbers they ran in the 1970s, right? Completely different today because we live longer, and the rates of return on those more stable investments like bonds and treasuries are much, much lower than they've ever been, right? So now that number is more like 2%. So if you have $400,000, that means you're only living on $8,000 a year, right? It's just ridiculous. But I mean, I've had several clients where they have $400,000. We've turned it into over 4,000 a month of cash flow, with real estate specifically. Again, passive, that's net profit after they've paid a property manager, after they've paid their mortgage payments, their taxes, insurance, possible HOA fees or whatever else. They still come out with at least, $45,000 to $50,000 a year from their 40,000 or 400,000, right? Very different than 8,000 a year that you're trying to pull out from the market. So I get that kind of conversation a lot. Someone tells me that said, hey, my goal is 100,000 a year of passive income. If they come to me and I know they have about $1 million, I'll say, great, possibly this year. If not this year, we'll probably accomplish it by next year or two, right? Like it's really just math. I mean, if you can make at least 10 or 12 or more percent a year doing various types of investments, and it depends on which investments they do, right? If you buy real estate, you have a much higher option there on a cash on cash return. If you're buying, if you're more buying into like, syndications, right? Like maybe you're doing commercial real estate, maybe you're buying into apartment complex, you might get more, but it might be more of a growth strategy. You might get 8 to 10% return cash flow before you get the big growth on the back end, right? Everything is different. And so that's why every person has their own recipe of how to get to that number and and how, what they want to do with that money. But it's really not hard. Like I just tell people like, hey, if you can earn at least 10% a year, do the math. Like, or if you know you can make 10% a year and your goal is 100,000 a year, you need $1 million, right? Just for passive investments. If you're doing more active investing, you can do it faster. But most of my people are usually coming to me asking to do passive stuff because they're already busy working as professionals or business owners already. They're looking for something that they don't have to babysit a lot,
So let me ask you, so if the people who have been doing the mainstream financial plan are coming to you,
Yeah.
and you're, coaching, working with them to achieve cash flow right now, are what are the steps? Are you going into a self-directed IRA? Are you cashing out of the IRA? Are you doing these investments in a tax deferred vehicle? How are you achieving your success?
It depends on, it does depend on their age, their goals. Like if someone says, hey, my goal is to retire by 50, well, then that IRA is not a good option, right? It's actually, because that's supposed to not even have a penalty until 59 and a half, and you still have to pay taxes down the road anyways. And part of the question we have now this year is, after the Trump tax plan is gone next year, because 2021 is the last year it's in effect, what's going to happen? Are they going to reset back to what they were before, where the tax rates would go back up again? There's a lot of uncertainty, right? So it always depends upon their goals, their objectives, and really their situation, right? So I'll give you another example. I had a chiropractor in San Diego. He's about 45, 46 years old. He'd done a great job saving money. He'd saved up several $100,000 in a lot of it in IRAs, right? Some of it in savings. He also been aggressively, and this was his main goal, aggressively paying down his investment property he had there and his own house. And so his whole focus was just, I'm going to save money in these plans, but I'm aggressively trying to pay off my houses, right? So I'll be free and clear in about 6 years. He's on target for 6 years. That would free up about $4,000 a month for him if he did that. Instead, I said, listen, if you got investment property in California, I can already tell you the numbers stink. If you're anywhere on the western half of the United States, your real estate probably isn't good for cash flow. And I was right. He was making $200 a month on a property that had $500,000 of equity in it. And I was like, listen, we can sell that property, get that equity out, put into other real estate to make a lot more than that. Again, even if it's 10% a year, we can make easily, 40, 50,000 a year off that. I said, and let's do a cash out refinance of your mortgage. Payment will go up about $500 to $1,000 a month, but we'll get another $400,000 out of it for just that small cost. So net of costs, after getting all invested, that's over $800,000, almost $900,000 to invest. That would generate on net of about $75,000 a year one, right? Now keep reinvesting that same $75,000. Don't even add more to it. He could add more, obviously, but not even add more to it. That would actually increase it to over $10,000 a month by 5 years out. So the great thing is that he could be at $10,000 a month in 5 years versus 6 years paying off his mortgages to do it in that time. Now, his big question was, all right, with IRA money, what do we do with it? I was like, well, that's another source. We could self-direct it and we could invest in certain types of things. We don't want to buy property with it. That's a bad use of that money. You lose the tax benefits. And you just never get favorable returns. But I mean, there are different syndications out there, right? There's different ways you can lend money at easily 8, 10+% a year, you know? So if you want to grow it, we can do that. There's tax liens. I have somebody that does tax liens. They pretty much always do a target of about 14 to 18% a year. Great place that you could potentially put your IRA money and let it grow and build. The thing is, though, he wants to retire before 59 and a half. So then it's like, how do we get the money out, without paying buku bucks in taxes? Well, one of the things you do is if we can get, not just him, but get his wife qualified as a real estate professional, because he's already full-time in his practice, right? But his wife could be a real estate professional. We do that after getting some properties. We can get all these deductions and depreciation and cost segregation we can do even on single family homes as well as multifamily, right? And the next thing you know, we're offsetting the taxes we pull out from the IRA, and there's very little tax and penalty on that money. And so we're able to keep more of that money to invest and create more with it. Again, it's always case by case. I don't recommend, I'm not securities licensed anymore. I dropped that in 2005. But I definitely look at those options, say, all right, what's your goals? All right, if you want to keep using your IRA, the thing is, that's not going to get you there if your goal is before 59 or 60 years old.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you diving into this. I think the realization that I've come to also with having parents and chance to become more familiar with their financial situation and how when you take the money out of a 401k as opposed to, when you keep thinking like it's make that bigger and bigger and bigger, trying to put more and more money into it. It's it's eye-opening when you see how the money comes out because now you have to pay the tax on it, and you have to your minimum your minimum distributions, I can't remember, required RMDs. The how that accelerates, and they're looking to get the tax. They want the tax on your 401k there.
That's right.
So as opposed to if you're working outside of that, how you have the ability to create that asset and let it grow and just collect the actual the cash flow, which was, in my mind, that's always what the retirement goal was to create a big enough nest egg that it just earned money for you, kind of like a dividend kind of thing. But that doesn't, I've yet to see that work in the 401k world.
They don't really make it work well, right? It's really tough to do with IRAs and 401ks. Even if you do it in alternative investments and you're self-directing it, still it's not favorable, right? Like now maybe if you move it to a Roth, you can create some tax-free income. But most of my clients, usually what we end up doing as a strategy, especially for them the growth phase where they're trying to build the assets to create that cash flow. We talk about getting your investment money to pay you twice, right? So I use what I refer to as like this max ROI bank, right? A tax-free supercharged savings account where I use life insurance. I use a whole life policy specifically, run the money through. We have very minimal cost. So we run the money through, right back out to go do investing. And what happens when you use that strategy, where if you put money into a savings account, you withdraw it, you're not making any money on the money you just withdrew, right? Other than in the investment. But the money you withdrew out of your savings, now the savings depleted, you're not earning much interest. Plus, let's be honest, if you were lucky to earn 0.1% in the bank account right now, that's pretty amazing. So you're not making much, and then you get taxed on that .nothing%, right? But if I use a strategy where I flow it through the life insurance, I'm getting tax-free money in there at the same time while making money inside those investments. So I'm actually able to make money in two places at the same time. So if I make 12% cash on cash return on my real estate properties, the cool thing is if I run it through my life insurance and then back out, and then I take the cash flow, flowing it back into the life insurance again, I actually end up making a net about another 4% on top of the 12% I'm already making. So I'm able to make more money faster, which allows me to have more money to invest faster too.
Okay, run that by me one more time. So you buy the whole life policy, which has a cash value, and you borrow against that?
Yeah, and it has to be a very specific type, right? Don't do the traditional whole life that a lot of people do, because not all created equal. And most insurance agents will never do it for you, right? Because the truth is, you got to cut, for an agent to do it, you got to be with the right companies, and you got to cut your commissions back about 75 or 80% to make it work, right? Not a very popular idea among the insurance industry or among insurance companies. But the cool thing is like whole life, usually it's front loaded. Usually if you put in for the first 2 years, you have almost no cash value in those first 2 years. It goes all the cost. The way I design it, those first 2 years, you usually have about 85% of your money in cash ready to use, right? So, you put in 25,000 a year for 2 years, that's 50,000. You usually have, 43,000 bucks that you can use versus nothing or $1,000, right? So low cost, higher returns. We're overfunding these policies to put in more cash, but we're keeping it very low on the cost side. And then what we're doing is we're taking that money, we go and invest it. Now, when you use a life insurance policy like that, especially if it's whole life, you can't do it with universal life because the numbers change on you, right? They don't let you compound money when you're borrowing against it. But with whole life, that's unique because I can actually earn compound interest on that full amount of money. So say that I have $100,000 I have in cash inside this whole life policy that's built up there. Now with that 100,000, if I borrow 50,000 of it, right? Normally if you withdraw 50,000 from your savings account, you're only earning interest on 50,000 because you just lost 50,000 out of there. But with whole life, I borrow from the insurance company directly. They give me like this line of credit that has no minimum monthly payment. There's no commitment. They just charge you 5% a year, right? But the cool thing is at the same time, my money over here, that full 100,000 is earning compound tax-free interest. So if what I'm doing is I'm using this line of credit from the insurance company, again, this private line of credit, using that to invest that 50,000, put as a down payment on a property, say it's a duplex. I take the cash flow from that duplex, say it's $500 a month, right? I take that cash flow and I'm flowing that to pay down that credit with the bank, with the insurance company. Now, as that's paying down, of course, the interest I'm being charged gets less and less and less, right? Just like when you pay on a normal loan, like a mortgage or a car loan. The more you pay towards the principal balance, the less and less gets charged interest every month, which is why your payment has less and less interest. Same thing happens here. The difference, though, is that now the money is still over here, compounding by itself. It far out earns the interest you're being charged on that loan, netting you, depending on your age and health, at least a 3 or 4% return on top of whatever you're earning on your investments. And that's tax-free returns too. So you double dip. You basically earn money in two places at the same time with that same dollars you would have used. Give you an example. I showed somebody just yesterday with one of my clients in Washington State. She was trying to understand the concept. And I said, let's look at your numbers. She's in her mid 40s, okay health, very, very average, if average health. So not great numbers compared to what some people will get. But I ran the numbers. I said, look, if you use your savings account earning 0.1%, right? Here's the problem is that, your money would build back up over these, 5 years to 176,000. I'm like, but if we use your life insurance, same money, your money builds up to 196,000 in those 5 years. So you make 20,000 more in 5 years using this versus just using your stupid savings account that again is taxable. It earns nothing. And by the way, it's exposed to lawsuits and creditors. That's the other cool thing. The life insurance in most states, 100% protected from lawsuits and creditors. Even if you have millions of dollars in there, they can't touch it. So there's that, as you talk about with risk and asset protection, that's a big thing. And especially with my real estate investors, they're saying, wait a minute, well, if I borrow from the insurance company and use that as a down payment on my property and I get a mortgage from the bank, doesn't that mean it's 100% leveraged? I'm like, technically, yeah. So can anybody make claims on it? No, there's no equity or very little equity they can attach to even if they do win a lawsuit, right? So they're scrambling, trying to find ways to put a lien against it when they can't. It's just so cool when you start to see what's possible.
No, that's fascinating how you can, the tools that are available but are not necessarily considered conventional and people kind of like, that work? But, I think we've all, at least saw the news story about President Trump's taxes and stuff. And I know my friends that are non-real estate, people are all frustrated, but the people that are real estate oriented go,
who's his accountant? That's what they're asking.
Yeah. That's kind of that's the options, opportunities that, exist. So that's great. Hey, Chris, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned to you before we started that by day I'm an insurance broker.
Yeah.
And I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. Mm-hmm. And there's 3 strategies we typically consider. We look to see if we can avoid the risk. If we can't avoid it, we look to see if we can minimize the risk. And if we can't avoid nor minimize the risk, we look to see if we can transfer the risk.
Yeah.
And that's what an insurance policy is.
Hmm.
And I like to ask my guest if they can look at their own situation, consider your clients, investors, your situation, tenants, market, et cetera, however you want to frame the answer.
Yeah.
But if you can take a look and consider or take a look and see what you consider to be the biggest risk. And for clarification, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer.
Hmm.
And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Chris Miles, what is the biggest risk?
I think the biggest risk, and this would apply to me or my clients or anybody really, is ignorance, right? Like I always tell people, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. Ignorance is seriously the most expensive thing in your life. I mean, that's really this whole conversation has been about. You mentioned Trump, right? People are mad about his tax returns. That's ignorance. Like it's what you know and what you can do that actually creates the most money and creates the most protection. People can say, "Hey, I don't need that insurance," right? Like that protection. But if they're ignorant to the risk that they're already taking, it doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter how positive thinking you can do. That risk is still there. You still have to manage and figure out what to do with that risk. And so I think that really is the biggest risk, is just ignorance. Is what you don't know is what hurts you. And also what you don't know is what keeps you being hurt. It keeps you living a life of struggle and lack. And if you can find the answers, if you can find out the information you need and act upon it, not just know it, but act upon it, you become somebody who's actually more unstoppable. Doesn't mean you don't have risk in your life, but it just means that if you're always in the mindset of, hey, I'm ignorant about something at some time, all the time, right? You'll start to realize I need to keep learning. And if you keep learning, you have a much better chance of success than those that think they know it all. They think that whatever they've been told, that's the truth. And that's, to me, is the biggest risk.
Well, it's well said. Definitely lots of truth in that. Chris, where can the listeners go if they would like to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned the Chris Miles Money Show. I always invite people to check that out. I mean, it's great free information you can watch on YouTube or even, on iTunes or whatever, right? You can definitely check out the show there. And then you can check out my website, moneyripples.com. That's MONEYRIPPLES.com, where I've got some great information there too.
Awesome. Chris, I want to say thanks for taking the time to talk today. I've enjoyed it and learned a lot, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Such a pleasure. Appreciate it, Darren.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.